Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Shireen Bhan. In July, the Prime Minister, while inaugurating an expressway in UP, brought to life an old debate. In his speech, the PM cautioned against what he called was revdi culture, ostensibly to lure voters at the cost of development and the exchequer. BJP leaders backed the argument, saying short-term politics of freebies will short-circuit the country. Even as the government and opposition parties like the Aam Aadmi Party spar over the issue, the Apex Court has decided to weigh in on the back of a PIL form filed by a former spokesperson of the BJP. The Chief Justice observes that loss to the exchequer needs to be balanced with the need for welfare measures for the poor. The Supreme Court has proposed setting up an expert committee to look into the issue, a suggestion backed by the Solicitor General Tushar Mehta. The Delhi government has argued that offering amenities free of cost or at subsidized rates are part of the socialist and welfarist model of development and essential in an unequal society. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said spending on health and education has never been called or classified as a freebie and has accused the Kejriwal government of giving the debate, and I quote, a perverse twist. The Reserve Bank of India, in a report published in June, linked the precarious condition of state finances to freebies, particularly power subsidies. Now, this is a complex debate which will not be adequately addressed in one television debate. But today, the chief questions that we're asking, is judicial intervention warranted or is it an overreach? And how do you define a freebie and who defines one? We will come to that in just a bit. But first, listen into the Prime Minister and Delhi's Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal.
आजकल हमारे देश में मुफ्त की रेवड़ी बांटकर वोट बटोरने का कल्चर लाने की भरसक कोशिश हो रही है। ये रेवड़ी कल्चर देश के विकास के लिए बहुत घातक है। रेवड़ी कल्चर वालों को लगता है कि जनता जनार्दन को मुफ्त की रेवड़ी बांटकर उन्हें खरीद लेंगे। हमें मिलकर उनकी इस सोच को हराना है। रेवड़ी कल्चर को देश की राजनीति से हटाना है।
देश के अंदर ये रेफरेंडम कराया जाए, क्या सरकारी पैसा एक परिवार के लिए इस्तेमाल होना चाहिए? एक पार्टी है जो चाहती है कि सारा सरकारी पैसा एक परिवार के लिए इस्तेमाल हो। जनता से पूछा जाए, क्या सरकारी पैसा एक परिवार के लिए इस्तेमाल होना चाहिए? दूसरा मॉडल है, दूसरी विचारधारा है, क्या सरकारी पैसा कुछ चंद दोस्तों के लिए इस्तेमाल होना चाहिए? और तीसरा, क्या सरकारी पैसा इस देश के आम लोगों को सुविधाएं देने के लिए, अच्छी शिक्षा, अच्छे स्कूल, अच्छे अस्पताल, अच्छी सड़कें बनाने के लिए इस्तेमाल होना चाहिए?
Well, political parties sparring over the issue of freebies versus welfare. To take the discussion forward, I'm joined now by Yamini Iyer, the President and Chief Executive at the Centre for Policy Research, S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner, Rathin Roy, Managing Director at the Overseas Development Institute. Yamini, Mr. Qureshi, Rathin, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. As I pointed out at the very start, this is a complex issue and not one that we can settle in this 130-minute debate on television. But Yamini, the very first question: is this a matter that the Supreme Court needs to revisit, a debate that the Supreme Court needs to re-enter? Because let's understand this for the benefit of our viewers who are also watching. This was an issue that was taken up by the Supreme Court in 2013. In fact, in that judgment, the Supreme Court had held that this was an issue that the Supreme Court would not get into. It was a matter that should be debated and decided on by the state legislature. So now with the Supreme Court weighing in and saying, let's set up an expert committee, let's get the RBI, the Finance Commission, the Niti Aayog, the Election Commission to be part of this committee and decide what the way forward is. Do you believe that this is necessary, warranted, or overreach?
It's complete overreach. This is a debate that has to be had between our politicians and their voters, all of us, as a collective society in the spirit of democracy. It is not a debate that can be had by the Supreme Court. It is also not a debate that can be had by a specially created expert body outside of the political process. The right place for this debate is Parliament. The right place for this debate is in our Gram Sabhas. The right place of this debate is between our politicians and our voters. Experts can most certainly weigh in. After all, we are also part of democracy and serve at the role of interlocutors. But this is not an expert decision. This is fundamentally, foundationally a political decision. Let us not forget, experts have always had a very different take on many of these so-called freebies in comparison to politicians and their voters. The Narega, PDS, for many years, in fact, for the entire decade up until COVID, was considered by many experts to be freebies that are best nothing less than helicopter drops of money for the poor. And in fact, it turns out that had we not built these two very crucial safety nets, the country would have starved in the midst of the COVID pandemic. This is politics. It's a political decision. Experts, economists, commissions all play a role in contributing information. Ultimately, it's a political bargain, a political negotiation, and by the way, a very legitimate one.
A political bargain, a political decision best left within the political framework. Mr. Qureshi, if I could address that issue with you, because the Election Commission, in response to the Supreme Court, has said that being a constitutional authority, it cannot be part of this independent committee, this special committee that the Supreme Court is speaking of, but it has also said that it supports the idea of looking at this issue of freebies. Now, I go back again to the 2013 judgment, because it was the basis of that where the Model Code of Conduct was designed and taken forward by the Election Commission. Now, given the current context as well as the current debate on a committee deciding what the future course will be, because that is what the Supreme Court has said, that it will base its decision and its directions on the committee's recommendations, what do you believe is necessary?
Well, first of all, I'm happy that the Supreme Court hasn't got dragged into it. And like 2013, then also it came before them, and they said, although it interferes with free and fair elections, it influences people's mind, but it is not a corrupt practice. Therefore, they could not, otherwise they would have made it illegal right there. And then they passed the buck, I would like to say, to Election Commission, okay, please call all political parties and discuss with them and frame guidelines. Now, I've got the feeling that the Election Commission also went through this exercise equally perfunctorily. They called the meetings of the political parties who all pounced on the Election Commission and say, who the hell are you? What we announced to our workers is our political legitimate right. And you cannot tell us what to announce, what not to announce. And then Election Commission came up with maybe there's a perfunctory kind of guidelines. Make promises responsibly, try and justify. So I think it was both the institutions went through a ritual, and rightly so, because I think both these institutions have no right to interfere, because a manifesto or announcing the election doors or whatever is a legitimate political right. Whether the promises are being made irresponsibly, that of course is a matter of concern. But legal solution cannot be found. It is for the political party, the opposition parties, who should remind the voters. So voter education is what is required. They should remind the voters what were the false promises made and which could not be implemented. It is for the media to analyze all the promises which are unfulfilled and again remind the voters. Let the voters decide. Everything something should be left to the voters to decide. And I don't think, these committees will come to any conclusion. What will they do? The political parties should not make announcement? Who can say that? And what law can say that?
Yeah, so you're basically saying what Yamini said, that a legal solution is not the way forward. A political solution is the only way forward. And of course, to the point that Yamini made as well, that you cannot deny the voter his or her agency in this matter. Ratin Roy, I want to address the larger issue with you now on what constitutes a freebie. It's very clear there is consensus on the panel between Yamini and Mr. Qureshi that there should be no legal solution to this. There can be no legal solution to this. This needs to be a political bargain. But now on the larger issue of what constitutes a freebie, as Yamini was pointing out, till a few years ago, the NREGS, in fact, was derided as a freebie, was held out as a poor example of a freebie. But today, it has been acknowledged and accepted and co-opted by even the sitting government. So who decides what a freebie is? And what is a freebie today when we talk about it in the context of a welfare state?
Thank you. I do not think that you can define a freebie in non-normative terms. The word itself is a bit nauseating, because what does it mean to say freebie? I use a road outside my house. I haven't paid for it. Is that a freebie to me? When I walk into a park that has been, that's a public good, is that a freebie to me? So what is or what is not a freebie implies a political judgment. And let me focus on just one so-called freebie as an example, which both the Prime Minister has mentioned and the Supreme Court has mentioned quite interestingly, which is discom subsidies. So what happens is that the state governments agree to give free power to agriculture for whatever reason. They then commit to reimburse the discoms for the cost of that free power. The problem arises when governments breach that contract, that promise, and do not reimburse discoms. So there are two separate issues here. The decision to supply free power to agriculture, which I think is within the remit of any government, and the decision to break contract and not pay for the costs of that free power to the discoms, which is what the Prime Minister has been grousing about, and the Supreme Court somewhat less competently has been making utterances on. So so there's no dispute that if a freebie is delivered as a consequence of a breach of contract, then it is legitimate for the courts to intervene. But the decision as to what is a freebie and what is not a freebie is a legitimate fight between Arvind Kejriwal and Narendra Modi. The Supreme Court has no place in that conversation.
The Supreme Court has no place in that conversation. But Yamini Iyer, I want to come back to you now to the other issue that's being raised as a point of concern, the issue of fiscal impact. Are we writing, or are state governments writing checks that they cannot afford? The fiscal implications on the exchequer on account of these so-called freebies being doled out. And do there need to be some safeguards in place? Is the current FRBM mechanism enough of a safeguard? Your thoughts?
So, of course, the fiscal implications of any choice that government makes has to be a matter of public debate, and it is certainly a debate between voters and their political representatives. Everything that government spends on, whether it is defense, whether it is on these so-called freebies, whether it is on building highways, building railways, running public sector enterprises, running airports. These are all matters that have fiscal implications. The choice of what you want to prioritize or under-prioritize is fundamentally and foundationally a political choice. Now, in that context, the question of where and how should governments prioritize is a matter that must be debated. But I think one of the limitations in the Indian context is that we reduce this debate to targets that have been set by FRBM committees, by global understandings of what is and isn't an appropriate target for fiscal deficit. Of course, it's no one's case that we should be profligate or get ourselves into serious debt. But all of this actually ought to be located into a clear vision, map, and understanding of the kind of economy we want to build and what are the kinds of prioritizations we need to have. So if as a country we say we are today really concerned about the large informality in our economy, we are concerned about the fact that we are a service-growing GDP, a service-growing economy, but we don't have the skill sets that we are giving to people. Therefore, we want to spend a large amount of money on education. You can say that, okay, I'll incur the debt today to be able to ensure that I promise everybody a better future, and that better future will be growth generating and will give us the possibilities of a 5 trillion economy. The problem today is that we don't actually have the economic roadmap. We have an FRBM target. So that FRBM target, fiscal deficit targets, put us in a place where we're very worried about what that 3.5% or 4% is. Whereas the real debate we need to be having, and that's where the question of my freebies versus yours, or what is a good freebie versus bad, can be actually genuinely debated. If you say, what is the pathway for growth for this economy? Then we can argue whether more investment in highways, more investment in education, more investment in power subsidies is good or bad, and then we can actually hold our governments accountable for what consequences their choices make for us every 5 years when we go to the hustings. It's in the absence of a plan, a vision, a clear statement of what the economic trajectory should be that we are having this debate on the back of targets that are set by expert committees without locating those targets in these larger economic and political questions.
And Ratin Roy, that's where I want you to come in as well, because this is something that the Reserve Bank has also brought up in its June bulletin, and something that the government is alluding to, saying that, look, the Reserve Bank is also pointing out at the fiscal impact on state finances on account of the so-called freebies. So the fiscal implications and the guardrails that need to be put in place, Ratin Roy, before I get the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu in.
You just flashed a summary picture of state debt GSDP ratios. And you have two of the most fiscally stressed states in there, Punjab and Kerala. You will note that these are far lower by an order of magnitude from the central debt GDP ratio. So what exactly are we saying when we say that state finances are stressed? 29.4% debt GSP ratio is fiscal stress as a macro indicator. Why? I do not understand. What the Reserve Bank is pointing to in a rather inelegant article, if I may say so, I've just read it in preparation for this interaction, is that the growth in subsidies is of an order of magnitude that could threaten the hitherto, despite COVID, rather salubrious condition of the state finances compared to the center. That last point I do not see. So I do not think that the major driver of any stress in state finances is any kinds of subsidies or freebies they give, any kinds of public expenditure they give. There are many other drivers of the fragility of state finances which the RBI has chosen not to comment on, such as the rise in cesses as a share of total tax revolution, such as delays in paying GST compensation cess, such as difficulties in sorting out the IGST problem. These revenue side, such as, starving centrally sponsored schemes and lavishing more money on central schemes. So central government mission creep on revenues, both in divisible pool and outside, I would submit as a far more serious threat to the stability of state finances than subsidies. And I think this is, as usual, a distraction and trivialization to deter us from looking at what is the real cause of potential weak or stress in the state finances.
Well, the issue of cesses that you bring up is an issue that the 15th Finance Commission has cautioned about as well. But joining me now is the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. Thiagarajan. Mr. Thiagarajan, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. As I pointed out, this is now a matter that's back in the Supreme Court. In 2013, we had seen the Supreme Court decline to intervene, saying that this does not amount to bribery or a corrupt practice under the People's Representation Act. This committee that the Supreme Court has now said will be set up to look at the way forward. I want to get your first thoughts on this reverie culture debate that the Prime Minister has stoked.
I feel like I'm watching a farce play out. I think all reasonable people can easily understand what Ms. Iyer, Mr. Roy, Mr. Qureshi have said. All of these are logical, thoughtful, based on the Constitution, based on rational thinking, based on statistics. And what we have playing out in the Supreme Court is a farce. There is nowhere in the Constitution that the Supreme Court gets to decide how the money of the exchequer, the public, should get spent. All of a sudden, I don't understand what new constitutional amendment has been perceived by the Supreme Court, where they think it's their business to decide how elected officials should spend the money of the public. I don't understand how the same Prime Minister who talks about freebie culture, his biggest state in the country, his chief minister has announced free bus rides. I don't understand how the same Prime Minister who talks about freebie culture being bad came and inaugurated a scheme to give 25,000 rupees per person subsidy by the ADMK government for two-wheelers to 1 lakh women. This is just pure politics trying to divert from the main issues. And any statistic anywhere will tell you that this is complete farce. There's no greater value to it than farce. It's like a bad comedy.
Okay, you're saying that this is a farce that's playing out. It's a bad comedy. But on the issue that's being brought up, and this is what the government's argument is, that this is short-term politics, its short-term gains, as opposed to prioritizing what they believe are multiplier impact on the economy by way of capital expenditure, short-circuiting the economy by putting stress on the exchequer. That's the argument that the centre is making against this culture of freebies. Your response?
Who are they? They have a budget deficit of 7%. Government of Tamil Nadu has 3.5. Who are they? They spend 35% of their revenues on interest payments. We spend 20. Who are they? They have taken 2 lakh crores off of their crony capitalist taxes and put it onto the backs of common people. What have they achieved that tells you that in any way they are competent? Who are they? They amend the FRBM Act whenever they want. That allows us also the right to amend our own respective acts. Since they cannot stop that, they use the back door of Section 293(3) of the Constitution, saying, while you owe us money, we'll enforce a borrowing limit on you beyond what your legislature puts to you through the back door. This is just dictatorial, authoritarian overreach by people who have shown no tendency, no capacity to execute anything. Now they're worried that other people are going to do well, and it's going to make their incompetence or inability to deliver look bad. So they divert the debate. Who are they? What basis do they have to say that they know better than anybody?
Okay, I'm going to continue with the response that's come in from the central government. And essentially, the argument is that when state governments offer free electricity, offer free power, and other such freebies, quote unquote, that they're borrowing from future generations and denying the present, denying the right of the future generations from having access to better opportunities, because you're going to then have a state government that is stressed and dealing with stressed finances. So act with responsibility, act with prudence. That seems to be the message that the centre is handing out at this point in time in the context of the freebie debate.
What has the centre done? In the last 7 years, the centre has more than doubled its debt outstanding. Whose children are going to pay that debt? Children of the planet of Mars? Aren't those going to be paid by Indian children? It's not as if the state debt gets paid by the state children and the union gets paid by God, right? Where did that debt come from, and who is that going to be settled by? Why is their fiscal deficit every year worse than most states? Why is their devolution to the states continuously reducing every year by the increase of cesses and surcharges, and they're not able to give the fair share that the Union Finance Commission said they should give? I mean, it's a farce. I don't know what else to say. Here are people who don't know how to do their job, who are failing miserably at it, who have outperformed or underperformed the worst state possible, now trying to dictate to us as if they are the guardians of all that is good and right. They are the guardians of all our children, and are worried that the parents are going to be profligate. The grandparents are not going to tell us how to do it right. The grandparents have been more profligate than the parents. Who are they to tell us anything?
So what do you believe is the way forward, Mr. Tyagarajan, if a legal solution is not the answer, as is very clear from the conversation that we were having just before you joined us? What do you believe is going to be the way forward to settle this issue?
As best I can tell, Shireen, the Constitution of India still applies. The Constitution of India, with all the amendments up till today, still applies. I don't see that there was a big lacune, there was a big gaping hole in the Constitution. The Union controls the states down to the last rupee of borrowing through 293(3). The Union can amend its act any way it sees fit. The states can amend their respective FRBM equivalent acts and still be under the heel of the Union. There is not even one hair's breadth of freedom left to the states to do things that the Union does not allow or does not want to happen. There is no room here, there is no lacune, there is no void that the wonderful wisdom of the Supreme Court needs to fill. There is no yawning gap that needs to be sorted through this committee of experts. Let the country continue to function, stop these diversionary tactics, stop this extra constitutional overreach. Nobody appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court as the guardian of the people's wealth. The Constitution says the legislature approves the expenditure of money, not the Supreme Court, not the High Court. The legislature approves the expenditure of money. The legislature of elected representatives, let them do their job. If there are excesses, the union is more than equipped to control them, but they have to start with their own balance sheet and their own financial performance first. It's like people who are failing at 8th class telling college students, no, you better study harder and get a PhD. How does it make any sense? And then you have an external body that has never gone to school, that has no authority to be in school, trying to tell the college students, no, you have to follow this subject and not that subject. It is a farce. I don't know what else to call it. It's a complete farce.
Well, Mr. Tyagarajan, Yamini Iyer, Rathin Roy and Mr. Qureshi, as I pointed out, this is only one of the many conversations that we're going to have on this issue. This is not an issue that can be addressed adequately in one television show. What is a good freebie versus a bad freebie? Who defines it? Who gets to decide it? What will be the way forward on this issue? There are many questions that need to be answered. But for today, Mr. Tyagarajan, Yamini, Rathin Roy and S5 Qureshi, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18 on Business 360. We'll take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a minute with more.